For the next couple weeks, we are going to be looking at different training methods. This week, we are focusing on the traditional training methods, and next week, we are going to focus more on the technology-based training methods. With a traditional training method, it usually is face-to-face and requires an instructor being present and a trainer or trainee also being present. The three different training methods we are going to be looking at are presentations, hands-on, and group building methods. Each is unique and has their own place within a training and development program. With the presentation method, the trainee is often a passive recipient of information. When you think of this approach, you think of your standard lecture where you would have a trainer come into a room and the audience sits there and listens to that individual talk about a specific topic. The same approach is used with students' presentations, in which a group of students will get in front of the class and talk about a particular topic or present on that topic. Same with team teaching. You take the standard lecture approach, but add 2, 3, 4 members who all are experts in certain areas and add their little bit to the lecture. You can use panels in which you may have a group of experts on a stage and they each talk about and discuss their own issue. Or you can have guest speakers. If you are, as a company, interested in a specific topic, you may go out and find an expert in that field and have them come in and be a guest speaker. So why would we use a presentation method? Well, because it is one of the least expensive options and time consuming. The problem with this is it lacks participation involvement. As a audience member, you feel like you are receiving information, but you can't give it back. Also, there is very little feedback. So when you leave that lecture, how do we know as a company if you learned any of that information? We really don't. There can also be a lack of meaningful connections to the work environment. If you go to a lecture on how to change a tire, how can you apply that to changing a tire? It can be difficult to do, and that can make it very difficult for the transfer of training. So there is a limited opportunity for this. To help supplement the shortfalls of this, there can be sessions on question and answer sessions. There can be videos, and there can be other audio visual techniques such as PowerPoints or other images to help convey that image. Next, we have the hands-on method. With this, the trainee is actively involved in the learning. He is not sitting there listening, being passive. He is actively involved in that learning. There are several different options for hands-on training. We'll start with on-the-job training, which follows that social learning theory of observing and imitating. So with on-the-job training, you are going to be placed on the job, you are going to be placed with an expert, and you are going to observe that expert doing his job or doing the job, and then you will imitate that. If you think back to, we had an assignment a few weeks back where the question was, this individual, this trainee, observed the expert doing the job and then was able to recreate that and did training occur. And in that situation, there were so many other variables at play that it was difficult to tell if training really did occur. Yes, they could replicate the job, but training maybe or maybe did not occur. So with on-the-job training, the expert is there to train that individual. The expert guides him through the process. This is a good approach because there can be a less investment, both time and money-wise, because you're not bringing in a trainer to do it. You're actually putting them in the workplace. There are some disadvantages to this approach in that everyone does not follow the same process. So if you have a different trainer, you're going to get a different process, and also the process that that trainer uses may not be the most appropriate method, and this can pass on bad habits, and these bad habits can lead to poor performance because they were not trained properly. I waited tables for several years, and watching different servers come in and they're seeing the training program they went to. Sometimes it was very frustrating to see some of the techniques they were being taught because you knew that wasn't the proper way to do it. And because of that, they're going to go out on the floor and believe they're doing it correct when in fact they are not doing it correct, and it can lead to some issues. So it is important to make sure that the trainers teach the proper techniques. Within on-the-job training, you also have self-directed learning, and that's where the employee takes responsibility for all aspects of the learning, including when it is conducted and who will be involved. The biggest issue with self-directed learning is motivation, and the student has to be motivated to learn. This is also one of the biggest weaknesses of self-directed learning, and I really compare this to online education and taking online classes. For you guys have 1 week to complete each assignment, and some classes are different where you have more time, less time, whatever it may be, but you have to be motivated to do it. You aren't required to come to class. You aren't required to read the book, complete the assignments on a specific day. You just have to have it done within that week. And if you're not motivated, it's easy to fall behind and struggle in a class. So you really have to be motivated. A perfect example of this are MOOCs, which are these huge online classes that are open to anybody. And the whole idea behind these is that anybody in the world can take a class and learn expertise. They're starting to get closer to actually receiving credit for these. But what people have found is that they haven't been very successful because of student motivation. And only about 8 to 10% of students who actually enroll in these MOOCs finish the class, just because they don't have the motivation to do that. When oftentimes there may not be a timeline. You just sign up for the class and you just work through it at your own pace. A lot of times that motivation isn't there to get through it. The good thing about this approach, if you are motivated, is that you can learn at your own pace. You still have contact with an expert or a trainer, so you can receive feedback. It's good for companies because it does reduce costs and allows for less trainers, because you can have one trainer that can be in contact with several trainees. Another option for on-the-job training is apprenticeship, or which is a work-study training program or method in which you learn both on the job and in the classroom. Usually you see this in skilled trades such as plumbers, carpenters. The good thing about this approach is that learners earn pay as they go. So once you start that job, you're actually making money and you are learning a trade. In this process, you learn the why and how, and when you are done, you should be able to find employment fairly easy because you have learned a specific skill. After on-the-job training, we have simulations, in which the whole idea is that you're going to simulate a real-life situation. They always talk about the idea of these airplane simulators in which people would learn how to fly planes. It is a risk-free environment in which if you crash a plane in a simulator, it's okay. So you are able to learn and you're able to receive feedback based on how you actually do it. It is important that these simulators be as realistic as possible in order to be effective. We'll talk a little bit more about simulations next week when we look at augmented reality and virtual reality and how they are really changing the landscape of training and development, creating these environments in which we can learn in a safe environment. We also have case studies, and if you've taken, let's say, a business ethics course, you might be familiar with case studies. And the whole idea is to present different cases and have groups or individuals think about that case, how they would handle that case, and then you have discussions and you talk about it. It's really important to have those discussions to get different people's perspectives. The whole idea behind a case study is to develop those higher order thinking skills, to be able to think critically about a situation, be able to analyze and come up with a strategy to solve the problem or address the particular issue. Next, you have business games, and that is where you require trainees to gather information, analyze it, and make decisions. This is primarily used with developing managerial skills, and oftentimes the games mimic the competitive nature of the business. And this could be teams, this could be individuals, it could be a game you play on a computer, it could be a game that is created by the trainers. You also have role playing, in which the trainees take on the role of someone else. This is usually used to help build interpersonal skills, and I always think of it, again, going back to my restaurant days, where you would have the server on one of the last days of training would have to greet and take the order of two individuals to actually test out. Well, those individuals usually would be the trainer and the manager. So there's a trainer and a manager would be role-playing as customers, and the server would have to go through that process and make sure that every step was followed and everything was done correctly. The good thing with role-playing is that it allows you to take on different roles and get different perspectives on the situation. Then lastly, we have behavioral modeling, which again follows that social learning theory, where you observe a behavior and then it is continuously reinforced until you realize this is the behavior that is necessary for this job. With this approach, you can present key behaviors and then model those. It teaches skills and behaviors, but not necessarily facts. So if it's a job that you really want a specific behavior for, it can be a good option. Lastly, we are going to look at the group building method, which often involves experiential learning, or learning through experience, or learning through reflecting on that experience. It includes adventure learning, team training, and action learning. The whole point of a group building method is to improve team or group effectiveness. The training is directed at improving the trainee skills as well as the effectiveness of the team. You need to share ideas and experience, build group identity, understand those interpersonal dynamics, and learn the strengths and weaknesses of your co-workers. So the whole idea is that you grow as a team, and the tighter knit that team is, the better the company is going to run. You always hear this in sports, where the teams that usually win are close-knit, tight teams where everybody gets along, and the teams that struggle usually don't function as the team and don't get along. I think a perfect example of this is the Cleveland Cavaliers right now are having some bickering and animosity, and it feels like they aren't playing as a team compared to, say, the Golden State Warriors, who are playing as a team and working together and winning. Is this always the case? No. But it is important to be able to work as a group and to be able to have that tight-knit association in order to work better together. So the first one is adventure learning, and where you go out and do some adventure together to try to build teamwork. The book talks about the idea of cooking classes, which I think are interesting. Usually when I think of adventure learning, I think about going out to the woods and doing different things where you have to work together to solve problems. But I think a cooking class is somewhat interesting, and seeing how people work together in that environment. It is important after you go on that adventure learning to actually discuss what happened and talk about it. It can be very physically demanding, I think, of the different obstacle courses that are created for different teams to go through and build that cohesive unit. And the whole idea is that everybody works together to complete that task. Now, obviously, there are some limitations with this, and it's still questionable how effective this is really in building a better company and a more cohesive unit. You also have team training, which involves coordinating the performance of individuals who work together to achieve a common goal. You're focused on the group behavior, knowledge, and attitudes, and can also include cross-training, where you may learn another person's job, which is always important because you know one perspective, you know your perspective, and it's nice that you can actually step into someone else's shoes and understand what they're doing. And oftentimes it allows you to work more effectively together because you can see how they approach the issue compared to how you do, and you can work together to actually improve the effectiveness of the group. You also have action learnings where groups have to solve a problem. Here's the problem, how are we going to solve it? It's usually an actual problem where you have to create an action plan, come up with a process to solve a particular issue. And there's accountability in that, and you may work as a group within your company. They may pull in outside customers, vendors, whoever it may be. It's important for companies because they can use this to solve problems, develop leaders, and build stronger teams. Anytime when there is a group activity, companies are looking at leaders. Who's going to step up? Who's going to take charge? And these are great opportunities for people to actually establish themselves as leaders within a group. So which is the best method to use? Well, there is no one right answer. The book does a very good job in one of its tables highlighting each of these training methods and some of the strengths and weaknesses of them and when you would use them and why you would use them. Usually a company will use multiple methods and try different approaches. When determining what is the best method, it is important to look at the learning outcomes. What are we trying to get out of this training program? And then tie that method to that. We're also looking at the transfer of training. How important is it that that trainee can actually take that knowledge and transfer it to the job? If it is a job where it's more hands-on, you're probably better to use the hands-on approach. If it's something of, say, sexual harassment, maybe the lecture approach is the best. If it's related to functioning as a unit, maybe you want to do some team training. So it's all specific to the situation. Also, as with every company, what's always important is money and time. So we need to consider those factors. Well, how expensive is this training going to be, and how much time are we going to lose by conducting it?